The first sign that something was wrong was not an angry email. It was silence. At 8:17 on a Monday morning, I walked into the office expecting the usual noise. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people talking over coffee. Instead, everyone seemed unusually quiet. Then my manager looked at me and said, "Can you come to the conference room?" I knew that tone. It wasn't a request. It was the tone people used when something had already gone terribly wrong. I put my laptop down and followed him. Inside the conference room were 3 people. My manager, the VP of technology, and his son, Ryan. Ryan was 26, confident, charming, and completely convinced that the rules of the company were written for everyone except him. He smiled when I entered. That smile should have warned me. My manager pointed toward the chair. "Sit down." I sat. The VP folded his hands on the table. "We have a serious issue with the Orion project." My heart sank. Orion was my project. For 14 months, I had designed it, tested it, rebuilt it, defended it, and practically lived inside it. It was the biggest project I had ever worked on. If Orion succeeded, our company would save millions of dollars every year. If it failed, the department would take the blame. I looked at Ryan. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That was when I knew. Someone had done something. My manager opened his laptop. Over the weekend, a new version of Orion was submitted to the executive review system. I frowned. I didn't submit anything. I know. The room went silent. Then the VP said something that made my stomach drop. "Your name isn't on the new version." I stared at him. "What?" Ryan finally looked up. "The system shows that I developed the updated architecture." For a second, I couldn't even process the sentence. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because sometimes your brain laughs when reality becomes too absurd to accept. "You developed Orion." Ryan leaned back. "I completed the final phase." I looked at my manager. "That's not true." He didn't answer. I opened my laptop. "Give me 5 minutes." The VP shook his head. "You're not understanding the situation." "No," I said quietly. "I understand it perfectly. Someone had taken my work, and they were about to present it as their own. What I didn't know yet was that Ryan hadn't simply copied my project. He had used his father's authority to gain access to systems he was never supposed to touch. And he had made one mistake. He assumed I wouldn't notice. That assumption was going to cost him everything. To understand why I couldn't simply walk away, you need to understand what Orion meant to me. I wasn't the most important person in the company. I wasn't related to an executive. I didn't have connections. I didn't walk into meetings expecting people to move aside. I had earned my position the hard way. I joined the company 6 years earlier as a junior systems analyst. At the time, I shared a tiny office with 2 other people. I was the person everyone called when something broke at midnight. If a server failed, I stayed. If a database crashed, I stayed. If a client had an emergency, I stayed. I didn't complain. I believed hard work would eventually speak for itself. And for a while it did. 3 years later, I was promoted to senior systems architect. Then Orion appeared. The company wanted to build a system that could connect several departments that had been using separate platforms for years. The idea looked simple on paper. In reality, it was a nightmare. Different databases, different security rules, different teams, different managers. Everyone wanted their own solution. I spent months designing the architecture. I created the original framework. I wrote the documentation. I tested the security layers. I stayed late more nights than I can remember. There were weekends when I came into the office while everyone else was enjoying their lives. I missed birthdays. I canceled trips. I ate dinner at my desk. But I didn't mind, because I believed Orion could change my career. My manager, Daniel, believed it too. One evening, around 9 p.m., he walked into my office. "You know what you've built, right?" I looked at the screen. "Hopefully something that works." He laughed. "You're going to be leading the company-wide rollout." I stared at him. Seriously. Seriously. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what that could mean. A promotion. A raise. Maybe even a leadership position. I wasn't chasing money. I wanted recognition. I wanted someone to look at 14 months of work and say, "You did this." Then Ryan joined our department. Everything changed. Ryan wasn't hired because the company desperately needed him. He was hired because his father was the VP. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. His official title was Project Innovation Associate. His actual power was much greater. When Ryan made a mistake, someone fixed it. When another employee made a mistake, they received a warning. When Ryan missed deadlines, managers adjusted the schedule. When we asked for resources, we were told to wait. When Ryan asked for something, it appeared the next morning. At first, I tried to help him. I showed him Orion. I explained the architecture. I gave him access to the documentation he was authorized to see. I thought mentoring him would make my job easier. I was wrong. Very wrong. The first strange thing happened about 3 months before the theft. I noticed that Ryan was asking very specific questions. Not normal questions. Questions about the structure of Orion. Questions about internal workflows. Questions about how the primary server communicated with the backup environment. One afternoon, he walked into my office. "Can you send me the latest architecture files?" I looked at him. "Which files?" "All of them." "Why?" "I'm helping prepare the executive presentation." I shook my head. "You don't need all of them for the presentation." Ryan smiled. "My dad wants me involved." There it was. His favorite sentence. My dad wants. I leaned back. "Send me the list of files you need, and I'll provide whatever you're authorized to access." His smile disappeared. "You don't trust me." "This isn't about trust." "Then what is it about?" "Access control." He stared at me for several seconds. Then he laughed. "Relax." He walked away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I discovered someone had downloaded one of the internal architecture documents. I checked the access logs. The download came from Ryan's account. I confronted him. He said it was an accident. I reported it to Daniel. Daniel sighed. "I'll talk to him." "Please do." He nodded. But nothing happened. No warning. No investigation. No chain. I should have understood what that meant. Instead, I trusted the company. That was my second mistake. 3 months later, on that Monday morning, I was sitting in the conference room watching Ryan claim ownership of my work. My manager finally asked, "Can you prove that Orion was developed by you?" I almost couldn't believe he had asked. I opened my laptop. Yes. I pulled up the project repository. My original architecture files were there. Except they weren't. The folder structure had been changed. Several files were missing. My documentation history had been altered. My first reaction was confusion. Then fear. Someone had tampered with the records. I checked the project history. The changes had been made from an administrator account. I looked at the VP. "Who has administrator access?" He didn't answer immediately. Ryan looked down at the table. That was enough. I closed the laptop. I'm going to need access to the audit logs. The VP shook his head. You're not authorized to investigate this yourself. I don't need to investigate. I need to verify the history. We'll handle it. I stood. With respect, sir, this is my work. His expression hardened. Watch your tone. I sat back down. For the next 20 minutes, they questioned me. Where had I stored the files? Who had access? Had I shared my credentials? Had I approved Ryan's work? Each question felt like another accusation. Finally, Ryan spoke. I don't think anyone is accusing you. I looked at him. You just presented my project as yours. He shrugged. I improved it. You copied it. His face changed. Just for a second. Then the VP interrupted. This meeting is over. I stood. Before leaving, I looked at Ryan. You should be careful. He smiled. About what? About believing that a title can erase a history. He laughed. I walked out. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to beg them to give me credit. I was going to prove the truth. That afternoon, I stopped working on Orion. Not because I was giving up. Because I needed to think. I went home early. I made coffee. I opened a notebook. Then I wrote one sentence. Never fight a lie with emotion. Fight it with evidence. I began reconstructing the project history from memory. Original design date. First prototype. Testing milestones. Team meetings. Documentation versions. Emails. Meeting notes. Approval requests. Everything. I had learned something during my years in technology. People could delete files. They could change documents. They could manipulate presentations. But systems often remembered more than people did. Every action leaves a trail somewhere. I checked old emails. There were hundreds. One email from 11 months earlier caught my attention. It was an internal message to Daniel. Subject: Orion, initial architecture complete. The attachment contained my original architecture proposal. Time-stamped. Signed. Approved. I saved it. Then I found another email. 6 months earlier. Orion Security Framework, final draft. Again my name. Again my work. Then I found something even more important. A project review meeting. The meeting minutes clearly stated. Primary architecture developed and maintained by my name. I smiled. But I wasn't finished. I needed evidence that couldn't be dismissed as paperwork. I needed the system history. The next morning, I requested access to the audit logs through the proper channel. The request was denied. Reason: administrative review in progress. That was interesting. Very interesting. I called Daniel. Who is conducting the review? He hesitated. The executive office. Who specifically? He didn't answer. Daniel. He sighed. Ryan's father. I closed my eyes. So the person investigating the theft was the father of the person accused of stealing it. That wasn't an investigation. That was protection. And that's when I stopped trying to win inside the company's normal rules. I started preparing for something else. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Our security administrator, Lisa, came to my office. She closed the door. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you give Ryan access to the primary server? No. She looked relieved. Good. Why? She opened her laptop. Because his account was added to the access group last Friday. I stared at her. Who added it? She shook her head. The log says an administrative override. Which administrator? That's the problem. She turned the screen toward me. The account responsible for the change belonged to a senior administrator. But the timestamp was strange. The administrator was on vacation that week. Can you prove that? Lisa nodded. I checked the authentication records. She paused. Someone used his credentials from inside the building. My heart started beating faster. Do you know who? No. Can you check the workstation? I already did. She looked at me. Guess what I found? I waited. The session originated from the executive floor. I said nothing. Lisa closed the laptop. I'm telling you this because I think you're being set up. I looked at her. Why would they set me up? Because if Ryan claims ownership of Orion, someone has to explain why you lost access to your own project. That sentence stayed with me. They weren't just stealing my work. They were building a story around the theft. And in their story, I was the problem. 3 days later, I received a meeting invitation. The subject was Orion Performance Review. The attendees included my manager, the VP, Ryan, HR, and the security director. I knew exactly what it was. They were preparing to blame me. I walked into the room carrying a folder. The VP started. We've reviewed the situation. I said nothing. There's concern about your handling of Orion. I raised an eyebrow. My handling? Yes. Ryan sat quietly beside his father. The security director spoke. Several project files were modified using your account. I looked at him. When? Last Thursday. I wasn't working Thursday. He frowned. You weren't. I was at home. Ryan finally smiled. The VP leaned forward. You're certain? Absolutely. The security director said. Then how do you explain the activity? I opened my folder. I don't. Everyone stared at me. I continued. I explain it by saying someone used my account. The VP shook his head. Do you have evidence? I looked at him. Yes. I placed the first document on the table. Then another. Then another. Emails. Project records. Approval documents. Original architecture drafts. The room became quiet. These prove I developed Orion. The VP glanced at Ryan. Ryan's expression changed. I placed one more document on the table. The original architecture was completed 14 months ago. Ryan shifted in his chair. And this, I said, shows the first time Ryan was given access to the project. The security director looked at the document. That's not possible. Why? Because the access date is after the architecture was completed. Exactly. The VP's jaw tightened. Ryan finally spoke. I told you I improved it. You improved a project you didn't have access to until months after it was created. He had no answer. The meeting ended without a decision. But I could see something had changed. For the first time, Ryan looked nervous. The following Monday morning, I arrived early. At 6:45 a.m., the office was almost empty. I went directly to the security operations room. Lisa was already there. She looked at me. You need to see this. She opened the access logs. There were several unusual authentication attempts over the weekend. Someone had attempted to enter the primary Orion environment using an account that should have been disabled. Then we saw something worse. Ryan's account had been used to access restricted project folders. I stared at the screen. That's not supposed to be possible. Lisa nodded. Unless someone changed his permissions. Who? She pulled up the change history. There it was. An administrative override. I asked, can we revoke his access? Lisa hesitated. Technically, yes. Do it. She looked at me. You're sure? Yes. He's the VP's son. I know. If the VP asks why, tell him the truth. Lisa took a breath. Then she removed Ryan's account from the restricted access group. Within seconds, his permissions were gone. For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt since the whole mess began. Control. But it lasted less than an hour. At 7:31 a.m., my phone rang. It was the VP. Come to my office. I walked upstairs. He was furious. You revoked my son's access. Yes. Who authorized you? The security policy. You don't make decisions like that. He was accessing restricted project data. He's part of the project team. He isn't authorized for the primary server. The VP stepped closer. Do you understand who you're talking to? I looked directly at him. Yes. And you still did it. Yes. Silence. Then he said, You've made a serious mistake. I nodded. No. I pointed toward the door. Someone made a serious mistake months ago. He stared at me. You're talking about my son. I'm talking about whoever stole my project. His expression went cold. This conversation isn't over. I walked out. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of him. Because I finally understood something. His power could open doors for his son. But it couldn't change what was already recorded. That afternoon, Daniel asked me to meet him privately. He looked exhausted. I owe you an apology. I sat down. For what? For not stopping this earlier. I didn't answer. He continued. I knew Ryan was taking more interest in Orion than he should. How long? Months. I stared at him. Why didn't you tell me? Because his father made it clear that Ryan was being prepared for a leadership role. So you let him take my work? No. Then what did you do? Daniel looked down. Nothing. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because he had betrayed me directly. Because I had trusted him. He had watched it happen. Then he said something unexpected. There is something you need to know. I looked up. Ryan didn't do this alone. My stomach tightened. What? Daniel leaned closer. I saw someone with him in the archive room 2 weeks ago. Who? He hesitated. Mark. Mark was one of the senior administrators. The same person whose credentials had been used to change the access permissions. I suddenly understood. Ryan had the motive. Mark had the technical access. And someone higher up had the authority to make the changes disappear. I asked Daniel, why are you telling me this now? He looked me in the eyes. Because I finally realized they aren't just trying to steal Orion. He paused. They're trying to remove you from the company. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel's words. Remove you from the company. Why? Stealing the project wasn't enough. Then I realized the answer. If Ryan wanted to claim Orion, my existence was a problem. As long as I remained at the company, I could say, that is my work. But if I were fired for misconduct, if my reputation were damaged, if the company believed I had violated security rules, then Ryan could become the person who supposedly saved Orion. The story would be simple. I was careless. Ryan stepped in. Ryan fixed the project. Ryan deserved the promotion. Suddenly, everything made sense. The altered files. The fake activity under my account. The suspicious access. The executive investigation. It wasn't random. It was a plan. I opened my notebook. At the top of the page I wrote, "Don't defend, expose." I started collecting everything. Not illegally. Not secretly breaking into systems. I simply preserved records I was already authorized to access. Emails, meeting notes, project approvals, change requests, security tickets, access reports. Every piece had a timestamp. Every timestamp told part of the story. And then I found the piece that changed everything. A meeting invitation. It had been sent 6 weeks earlier. The meeting title was Orion Transition, RYAN Leadership Plan. The meeting happened before Ryan had supposedly completed the project. I stared at the screen. They had decided he would lead Orion before he had even created it. I knew then that I had enough to expose the lie. But I wanted more. I wanted the truth to be impossible to deny. 2 weeks later, the executive committee scheduled the final Orion presentation. Ryan was supposed to present. I wasn't invited. That was fine. I didn't need an invitation. Because Daniel forwarded me the meeting agenda. The presentation would determine who received leadership of Orion. Ryan had already prepared his slides. The title read, Orion, developed and delivered by Ryan Carter. I stared at the screen. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because now they had put their lie in writing. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I didn't create an angry speech. I didn't insult Ryan. I didn't threaten anyone. I created a timeline. 14 months. Every major milestone. Every approval. Every architecture decision. Every security review. Every version. And every point where Ryan entered the project. His involvement began 8 months after the original design. That alone was powerful. But I had something better. The original version of the architecture. And the current version. The similarities were impossible to ignore. The same structure. The same nomming system. The same unusual optimization method I had created. Even the same comments inside the technical documentation. Ryan had copied my work. Then changed a few words. He thought that was enough. It wasn't. The boardroom was full. Executives. Department heads. Security. HR. Senior managers. Ryan stood at the front. His father sat near the center of the table. I stood at the back. Nobody expected me to speak. Ryan began confidently. Orion started as a complicated integration challenge. I almost laughed. He was repeating my own introduction. Then he showed the architecture diagram. My architecture diagram. Only the colors had been changed. He continued. My team and I developed a scalable framework. I stepped forward. Stop. Every head turned. Ryan froze. The VP stood. You were not invited to present. I looked at the board chair. I know. The chair raised a hand. Let him speak. Ryan's face tightened. I walked to the front. I connected my laptop. The first slide appeared. Orion, original architecture. Under it was the date. 14 months earlier. Then my name. I moved to the next slide. The same architecture. Same structure. Same core design. Different date. Ryan said, This doesn't prove anything. I clicked again. An email appeared. My original submission. Then another. Approval. Then another. Security review. Then another. Project milestone. One after another. The room became silent. Then I showed Ryan's version. I highlighted the matching sections. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, this is not a similar design. I paused. This is the same design. Ryan interrupted. You can't prove I copied it. I turned toward him. I don't need to. I clicked again. A document appeared. The metadata. The original creation date. The author. My name. Ryan's version had been created from a copy of that original file. The room went completely silent. Ryan looked at his father. His father looked at Mark. And Mark looked at the floor. That was the moment the entire room understood. The theft wasn't a theory anymore. It was documented. The board chair asked, "Ryan, where did you get the original architecture?" Ryan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His father stepped in. "My son worked with the project team." The chair looked at him. "That wasn't the question." Silence. The chair repeated, "Where did he get it?" Ryan finally said, "I had access." I replied, "You weren't authorized." He looked at me. "You gave me access." "No. I was on the project." After the architecture was completed, Ryan became frustrated. "You're making this personal." I shook my head. "You made it personal when you tried to make my work disappear." The board chair turned towards security. "Can we verify the access history?" The security director nodded. "Yes. Do it." The information appeared on the screen. Ryan's account had accessed restricted files. Mark's credentials had been used for administrative changes. The executive override had altered permissions. Then the chair asked the question that finally broke the room open. Who authorized these changes? Nobody answered. The chair looked at the VP. "Was it you?" The VP remained silent. That silence was answer enough. Within hours, the investigation changed completely. I was no longer the employee under suspicion. Ryan was. Mark was questioned. The security team began a full audit. The executive office was required to explain why administrative controls had been bypassed. And Ryan's access was permanently revoked. But I wasn't finished. I had one final piece. I asked the security director to review the first unauthorized download from months earlier. The download came from Ryan's account. Then another. Then another. The pattern showed that he had been collecting my work long before the final theft. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The company couldn't ignore it anymore. 3 days later, Ryan was removed from the Orion project. A week later, Mark resigned. The VP stepped away from direct oversight of the project. And I received an unexpected email. The subject line said, "Orion, leadership appointment." I opened it. I had been appointed director of systems architecture. The salary increase was substantial. But the money wasn't what mattered. The final sentence mattered. The company recognizes your leadership, integrity, and ownership of the Orion platform. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. I didn't celebrate. I simply sat there. Because for 14 months, I had wanted someone to say those words. And now they finally had. A few weeks later, I saw Ryan in the parking lot. He looked completely different. No confidence. No expensive smile. No group of people following him. Just Ryan. He stopped when he saw me. "You won." I looked at him. This wasn't a competition. He laughed bitterly. Of course it wasn't. I didn't respond. He continued. "You could have let me have the project." I stared at him. "You could have built your own." He looked away. "I thought you had enough." "Enough? You were already senior." I shook my head. "You didn't want my position." He looked at me. "You wanted my work." He didn't deny it. After a moment, he said, "My father said I needed something big." I answered, "Then he should have taught you how to build something." Ryan lowered his eyes. I walked past him. Then he said, "I didn't expect you to fight back." I stopped. I turned around. That was your biggest mistake. Then I walked away. 6 months later, Orion went live across the company. It worked. Not perfectly. No major project ever does. But it worked. The company saved millions. Several departments became more efficient. And the project became one of the biggest successes in the company's history. I was asked to speak at the launch. Standing in front of hundreds of employees, I remembered the first version of Orion. A small idea. A messy diagram. A tired employee working late at night. Nobody knew where it would go. Then I remembered the conference room. The accusation. The stolen work. The silence. The fear. In the moment, I revoked Ryan's access to the primary server. People sometimes think revenge means hurting the person who hurt you. I learned something different. The strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's proof. It's standing in the same room where someone tried to erase you, and watching the truth speak for itself. I didn't have to destroy Ryan. I didn't have to humiliate him. I didn't have to shout. I simply removed his access to something he never had the right to control. The rest happened because of his own choices. About a year after everything happened, I received one final email from the VP. He had left the company by then. His message was short. He wrote, "I should have handled things differently." I stared at the sentence. Then I deleted the email. Not because I was angry. Because I no longer needed anything from him. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not revenge. I had moved on. That was the part nobody had expected. They thought I was fighting to prove I was better than Ryan. I wasn't. I was fighting because the truth mattered. And once the truth was established, I didn't need to keep fighting. Looking back, I realized the biggest mistake I made wasn't trusting Ryan. It was believing that hard work automatically protects you. It doesn't. You can work harder than everyone. You can stay late. You can sacrifice weekends. You can build something incredible. But you still need to protect your work. Document everything. Keep proper records. Follow access rules. Use official channels. And never assume that people in powerful positions will always do the right thing. But there's another lesson too. When someone betrays you, don't let anger make your decisions. Anger is loud. Evidence is quiet. Anger can make you say things you regret. Evidence can make the truth impossible to deny. Ryan expected me to explode. He expected me to accuse him emotionally. He expected me to lose control. Instead, I documented everything. And when the moment came, I didn't need to convince anyone. The facts did it for me. That Monday morning, I walked into a conference room believing my career was being stolen from me. Months later, I walked out of another conference room with the leadership of the project I had built. The difference wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge. It was patience. It was evidence. And most importantly, I refused to let someone else's betrayal decide who I was. So if you've ever had someone take credit for your work, if you've ever been betrayed by someone with more power than you, if you've ever been made to feel like your voice didn't matter, remember this. You don't always have to fight louder. Sometimes you just have to stand long enough for the truth to catch up. Because people can manipulate a story. They can change a presentation. They can rewrite a document. They can even use their power to silence people. But eventually, the truth leaves a trail. And when that trail finally reaches the light, the person who thought they had won may discover they were only building the evidence against themselves. That was my story. The VP's son stole my project. I revoked his access to the primary server. And in the end, I didn't have to destroy his career. He destroyed his own position, The moment he decided someone else's work was easier to steal than his own success was to earn. And I learned something I will never forget. Never underestimate the person you think you've already defeated. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the evidence that changes everything.